Listen to those angels. One day, I want to have a sermon in our church before I go of testimonies of angels in people's lives. Are they real or are they fairies? Our sermon today. Ring, 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 and the phone was ringing 2:30 in the morning. The young fellow whose phone was ringing, his mother and father had been involved the day before in an accident. The father had been scalped by the steering wheel of the vehicle, and the mother had a broken hip and internal damage. What would you think of if the phone rang at 2:30 in the morning? He thought the same. The worst has happened. But no, it wasn't. The woman on the other end of the phone said, "Quick, quick, help, help, my daughter's committed suicide." What? He was wide awake. "Where are you? What can I do?" "I'm in the ICU." And so he dressed very quickly and raced off down to the hospital. What was the story? When he got there, he saw an older lady and a young lady. The older lady looked about as sweet as a lemon. The other one was very, very serious. It was so depressing. The scene was so depressing that he was scared to talk, because he thought if he spoke he would also burst into tears in this situation. The older lady told him the story. Her son, lovely young man, grew up in the church and had a little bit of fun once or twice, not with ice, but ice can do the same thing. His little bit of fun was with alcohol. And he was addicted virtually immediately to alcohol. And when he got onto the alcohol, he became very violent, very abusive. And he had bashed his wife many times. She was only about 22 now. They had 2 little kids. He had bashed the kids. He was very, very cruel, very, very harsh, very, very hard. This night, she had had enough. She raced out in the car and drove up onto the bridge. Any of you know where that bridge is? Val knows. She drove up onto that bridge and got on the peak of the bridge, jammed the brakes on in the car, and she leapt over the side. Cars screeched to a halt. She aimed at those big pillars at the bottom of the bridge, and she missed. She landed in the water. Ambulance, fire, police, well, I suppose fire wasn't there, was emergency services. Everybody was there racing around looking, and they picked up this young lady and rushed her off to the hospital. Thus my phone call that night that she called. She left a letter, and this is the letter that she left. "I am no good. Nobody loves me. I want to die." That's a sad scene, isn't it? And the young pastor had just rushed into that hospital, into that scene. What could he talk to her about? What could he say? How could he encourage her? You know, he just sat there for moments. And then eventually just dropped the voice and said to her, "Sweetheart, what happened?" And she burst into tears. You know, tears are a good medicine sometimes. He was holding her hand and her hand went limp. What happened? What happened? What could he say? I want to go back. We'll come back to the purpose in a moment, what he did say. I want to go back to when I was here last time. And none of you have a clue of what I spoke about. So I'm going to tell you again. I spoke about, or from, the book of Revelation. And we took chapter 1, Revelation chapter 1. Remember? Oh yeah, everybody remembers now. Yeah, oh, that's good. We all remember. Verse 1, the revelation of Jesus, or the revelation from Jesus. The revelation about Jesus. And then we go down to verse 3. When we see Jesus, when we have the picture of Jesus, the automatic and immediate fruit is there's joy in the life. Happy are they that read, happy are they that hear, happy are they that know, happy are they that see the picture of Jesus. Then we go on to verse 7. And verse 7 says, I am coming back. Why would Jesus come back? Because we're here. Verse 9. He hasn't promised a flower-strewn pathway all this life through. But Jesus has promised, lo, I am with you. Come on, next word. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. And that buoyed John up. Nothing could take away the happiness. Nothing could take away the joy from the disciples that they knew in that story. And so then we got down to verse 17 where it said, John fell down at the feet of Jesus. And when he fell down at the feet of Jesus, Jesus reached down and picked him up. The nearer we come to him, the more sinful we appear in our own eyes. True or false? Sadly, it's true. And you know what? It's true of all of us. It's true of all of us. So what can he talk to this young lady about? I want to go back to Revelation this morning and just talk for 1 or 2 moments on some of the things, the nearer we come to him, to pick the message of what Jesus would have us take to our communities, take to our world. All right, Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 and 7. Now, I had a couple of our young people ready to do this, but I've missed them this morning and I couldn't find them, and so I'm going to go on, but I'm going to use them another day. I want our children taking part in our church services. But listen to this one here. I saw, he said in a loud voice, fear God, give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Hey, that's gone down 2 verses. Then I saw, now what a funny colour. Who made that PowerPoint up? Doesn't shine up very brightly, does it? Well, I can only blame one person for it, so. Then I saw another angel fly across the sky, having the everlasting gospel to proclaim unto those that dwell on the earth. Now we can go to the next one. And he said in a loud voice, fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made the heaven and the earth. I'm going to take 2 more verses before we come back to that verse 6 again there. And I want to go down to verses 13 and 14 if you've got your Bibles open. I didn't put these up on the board. He said, John said, and he heard a voice from heaven, write these things down. And then he said, and I looked, and there was a white horse, and the rider had a, what's the word I've got here somewhere, a sickle? Yes, there it is, a sharp sickle, crying out, ready to harvest. In other words, John is showing us a picture of the time just before Jesus comes. And the message just before Jesus comes, we as Adventists, we call it the 3 angels' messages. But I want to go back to the first angel and see the foundation of the very first angel so that we can understand what are these things about. The revelation of, what does the book start off with? The revelation of Jesus. So let us come down here and notice the very foundation. I saw another angel, verse 6. And now, once it goes, is that thing working? What am I doing wrong? I saw another angel fly in midst heaven, having the everlasting gospel. What is it? The everlasting gospel. Salvation is in Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. And that's the message that Jesus would have us before he comes again to take to the Muslim world. That's the message he would like us to take to the Jewish world. That's the message he would like us to take to the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Christians, even the secularists in our society. What is it? That we have somebody that paid the price for our redemption. Salvation is in Jesus Christ alone. Now then, it's used an expression there, the everlasting gospel. How is it possible to have something everlasting? Is it possible? Have a look at this. Everlasting would be before creation. Peter said, and Peter was the great disciple of Jesus, Peter it was that said, we were not redeemed by silver and gold, but we were redeemed by the precious blood of Jesus from when? before the creation of the world. 1 Peter 1:18-20. Paul, the great evangelist, Paul put down, you were chosen, you were his family, you were his children, you were chosen before the foundation of the world. Hey, that's a long time back, isn't it? Are we starting to get a concept of everlasting? It goes the other direction as well, but let me go down to Revelation now. John, the beloved disciple. John said, all worship him whose names are written in the Lamb book of life. From when? From before the creation of the world. What are these people really trying to tell us? I believe they're trying to tell us, or they are telling us very clearly, that God had a plan. God was never caught by surprise. Before the creation of the world, he had us in mind. He was out to redeem us. Sadly, that is, if anything went wrong. Sadly, Genesis chapter 3 gives us a picture of where things did go wrong. How Eve was beguiled, how Eve was deceived, how Eve took the apple, how she gave it to Adam. Adam grabbed that, I'm not going to lose her over a stupid little apple. So Adam just took and ate. What is the very first thing we see after Adam and Eve ate the apple? Put your thinking caps on. What's the first thing you saw? You see God in the garden looking for Adam and Eve. And you see Adam and Eve running away, hiding, trying to get away from God. And here he is calling out, Adam and Eve, come here. Did he know where they were? Of course he knew where they were. But you know, maybe he wants us to own a problem sometimes. And so he called for Adam and Eve and brought them out. And then he made a promise. He revealed that everlasting plan. He revealed the before creation plan. I will pay for your sin. I will redeem you. I will bring you back. You're not redeemed with silver and gold, but by the blood of Jesus. That's what John is calling in Revelation. That's what he is calling the everlasting gospel. The decision for us to make. Everlasting, Jesus has paid for our sin. I would like to suggest this morning that this is jolly good news for us. A lot of people won't accept it because it's not fair. And I'll be honest, it's not fair either. It's not fair to God, but it's good news to me. It's not fair at all. What are we really like? You and I sitting here, piously in church. I thought of that young lady there in hospital. By the way, I was that young minister that got the call when we were in Tassieval. I got that call that night. What's the difference between that young lady in that bed, in that hospital, and those of us sitting here in church? Because a church is a hospital for sinners. What's the difference? Because I know, and if you're honest with yourself, you know that you're no good. True? True? None good, no, not one. Why don't we go out and commit suicide? Because we know that we are loved. And because of that, we don't want to die. We have hope. We have a blessed hope because of that. The everlasting gospel, a story that Jesus paid for us. But what are we really? What are we really inside? Have a look at this. David in Psalms says, there's none righteous, no, not one. If you feel that you're good enough for heaven, I would love to assure you, you're probably on the wrong road. We've got to feel our nothingness and come to him. David again in Psalm 49, no one can redeem another. That secret that David gives there is the secret that turns so many of the other religions, I'm talking about, when I say religions, Buddhism, Mohammedanism, Hinduism, etc. They don't like that concept because it's not fair. And I'd agree Christianity is not fair either. David was, Psalm 51, before I was born, I was a sinner. I've always been rebellious. I've always had these problems. Jeremiah, I was born in sin. Isaiah, sinner from birth. Romans 3, Takes up what Paul said back in the Psalms. None good, no, not one. Romans chapter 3 verse 23. All have sinned, all fall short. It's a pretty bleak picture, isn't it, of humanity, and it's including all of us. I love to go to the next verses in many of those stories, because take Romans 3 for example. The very next verse says but, being. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death, but. Don't stay on the negative, don't stay down there, don't be put down. Look up, but God demonstrated his love toward us. He has redeemed, he has purchased. Let me stop with this bad news just for 1 or 2 moments more, because the sin of Israel in the time of Jeremiah, and we've been looking at the redemption of them in Ezra and Nehemiah this quarter in our Sabbath school lessons. What was the big sin that led Israel to go and worship Baal? What was it that led Israel to go and worship Baal and sacrifice their own children to paganism? What was it? Let me give you 2 verses. 2 verses, Jeremiah 2 and Jeremiah 3. They said, we are innocent. We are innocent. We are dancing with the celebrities. We are innocent. We have no sin. Now, could that possibly knock at a Christian home door? Could it knock at a Christian church door? Or could it knock at a Seventh-day Adventist door? Could that sin be available? You see, we don't see idol worship rising up in Israel again after this time. But we see this problem continuing right through history, where the devil has beguiled into legalism, into perfectionism, into thinking, I'm good enough. We've done it. I was talking to my wife last night and she gave me a few words. What were they, Dale? What is our Baal? What is our, I forget what they were. We were talking about, didn't you? They were good because Hazel said them. But you know, since I've been standing up here this morning, there have been many wives bashed in Australia. There have been lots and lots more around the world. There have been hundreds of cars stolen. There have been murders. There have been, what did I else write? Oh, suicides. Just since I've been standing up here this morning with us. These things are happening continually. Thousands per day. Thousands per day. Cyberspace. Man, what was it last night where they caught these people? They had these Ferraris and they had these cars racing around doing donuts and whatever it was, paid on money they had taken down from cyberspace. Just raided people's accounts. 63 or 93 million or something they took one day. Phenomenal, the fraud, the evil out there. Do I have to go on about we're living in the land of the enemy? Well, let's get on and get out of there. With that terrible news, I would like to see if we can find some good news. Here, let's see if we can find some good news. I wish it were true that we could live without sin. I'd like to be like Jesus, wouldn't you? I'd really like that. But we have to wait a little while. If we confess he is faithful, let's put it off. He is faithful. But Romans chapter 1, Paul particularly, I'm quoting here on this to bring this good news. He said in Romans 1, it is the goodness, it is the life of Jesus that brings power. The gospel is power to save. Paul, I'm not ashamed. It brings me up. Verse 17, because the righteousness of God, not the rightness or the wrongness or the goodness of a person. You know, that truth shattered the world in the 16th century. Romans 3, I mentioned that a while ago. For all have sinned, all fall short. We're all out of the picture. But he has redeemed. He has paid for our salvation. He's made it available. The big but in Romans 3, God, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God. Romans 5, I love this one. Paul tells us that we have hope. And we have hope because we have a God. We have genuine hope, real hope. Then he tells a very funny story, and I'll come back to this one in a moment. Rarely, maybe we could hear of one person dying for another person, but you don't hear those stories very often. But maybe you could hear it. This is in chapter 5. But, and there's another big but God demonstrates his love toward us, that while we were sinners, Jesus what? Jesus what? Jesus died for us. Jesus died for me. In fact, we can go one more verse, verse 10. He said, we are saved by his life. That's how we're saved, by his life. I think this is motivation or encouragement for us to quit. We call it the good news. Jesus is my Saviour. Jesus is my substitute. Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. I said this is the message that we're to take to the world, to take to our communities. I also mentioned a moment ago that we ought to take this to the Muslim world, the Hindu world, the Jewish world. Do you know why? Because it is the thing they hate the most. I've got to pay for my own sins. That's why I walk the long way to get to the mosque, because I can count those steps as good deeds. My good deeds must outweigh my bad. Is that your philosophy? Is that your thinking? I will pay my tithe because that gets me a good position in heaven. I'm going to go to church on Sabbath because that gets me a good position. The motivation, what is it that drives us to come to here, come to worship? The different realization makes a difference in the life that we live here and now. I mentioned the story of young people. Young people, perhaps someone may die for another one. You know, there's two little boys. They grew up together. They were very, very good friends. They were mirror images of each other in action, in play, in character. They were just such good friends. They played marbles together. They played soccer together. They played rugby together. Whatever boys do, they did it. You know, as they got older, one of those boys was attracted to a young lady and he got married. The other young fellow never married. The young fellow that was single had a very good job. He was working in an office. His friend, they would still meet quite regularly and associate, fellowship together. They were still good friends. In fact, when the kids were born, he was the godfather of the children. But anyhow, one day there was a crime committed. Some people broke into a home and they wanted to steal property that they knew was there, this old bloke had hidden in his house. And they broke in, and in the tussle, the old man got knocked over and he died. Now, in this country where my story is coming from, you were guilty until you could prove your innocence. Not in our system. And lo and behold, this young man that was married with two little kids, was charged with the crime. And his friend was reading the paper and saw it, and he said, that's not him. He would never do that. I don't believe it. So he said, this is a frame. This is a setup. He raced down to the police to give witness, to give his testimony about his friend. He was knocked back. He went down to the magistrate. He was knocked back. He went down to the prison, to the warden. He was knocked back. And every day now the fellow was in prison and the case was going on. He was down there to the prison. I want to see my friend. I want to talk to him. It just cemented in his mind more firmly that this was a make-up. This was just that they had gotten someone, they wanted to prove a point. Well, he just kept it up until the day before the execution. That man was sentenced to death. And eventually the warden gave in. He said, I'll give you 10 minutes. No more. 10 minutes. So this young man dressed himself in clothes that he thought prisoners would look like, and he went down there so that he could go into the prison to his friend. And the warden opened the gate and let him in. And as soon as he stepped inside, he pushed the gate and locked the gate again. Then he went through another one, opened the gate, went through, locked the gate. Hey, he couldn't get out now, whatever happened. took him right down in the bowels of the prison, and there was his friend right down there in the bottom. And he said, all right, 10 minutes, and opened the gate and let him in. He ran into his mate, and their arms just fell around each other, and he whispered, quickly, quickly, let's change clothes. 10 minutes later, they heard the footsteps coming back to the gate. And the warden yelled out, righto mate, out you go. Which one went out? Let's change clothes. And the one with the family was led out and went back home. The next day, the young man paid the supreme price. Do you believe the story? Could it happen? Could it happen? Is it likely to happen? Rarely. Maybe. It could happen. But Paul said it did happen. Paul said it happened. God gave his life for you and I, that we might be there. So I would like to know if this good news or if this story has any effect upon the life that we live here and now. Do we just take all this and we just sing, rescue the perishing boy, I'm there, I've arrived? Or does it make a difference in the life that we live here and now, the way that we relate to people in our community or our own family or homes? Does it make any difference? And I want to take Peter just very quickly for a moment and have a look at the life of Pete, because Pete was a fantastic disciple, but he was a proud, religious, boasting Pete. You remember the last night that he spent there with Jesus? He said, I will never leave you. Everybody else can run away. Anybody else can be killed. Anybody, but I'll stand up for you. And just a few verses later, a little girl said, hey, you're one of them. No, fear I'm not. Yes, you are. How do you know? Because your speech betrays you. The way you talk. Man, he soon used language that betrayed where he came from. He was a fisherman. He was not one of them. And his language betrayed that he knew nothing about Jesus. And when he did, when Adam and Eve took the apple, when Adam and Eve stole that fruit, where was God? Where was God? Looking for them. Looking for them. When Pete let out all those profanities, when he convinced that girl that he was not one of them, where was Jesus? Have a look. It says there in verse 61, Jesus looked at Pete. Jesus looked at him. And Pete turned around there and raced out from that hall and wept, baptized in tears. He was ripped to pieces by his own stupidity and what he had done. Now we want to see Pete as a Christian. We want to see Pete converted. Have a look at him 5 or 6 weeks later. Acts chapter 2. Peter is down there, same area, same people around, same government, same church board, same officers. And Pete stands up and he preaches. And thousands of people were converted. They went to the boss of the church board and said, drag them in. Hey, you fellas are not allowed to talk like that. The next chapter, chapter 3, Pete, this coward, going down to the church, going down to the temple. And as he's going down there, a fellow was sitting there, hey, gimme, mate, hey, gimme what? I haven't got anything. Oh, yes, I have. In the name of Jesus, get up and walk. And that man leapt up and leapt and praised and sang and made a lot of noise and a lot of attention, and a lot of people saw. And what happened to Pete? Dragged off before the Sanhedrin, dragged off before the very same people that crucified Jesus. And he said, men, there is no other means, there is no other way, there is no other name under heaven whereby we can be saved. Jesus is the answer. Salvation is in Jesus and Jesus alone, in no one else. Does the gospel make a difference in the life here and now? Did it make a difference in the life of Pete? Has it made a difference in your life and mine? There's one last story in finishing. We do have some parents, and I think John Hammond might have mentioned last week about fathers provoke not your children. Didn't he use that verse? And no, the dad said, children obey your parents or something, and then fathers provoke. I think we probably all have stories we could tell a little bit about fathers, have we? Well, sometimes dads, we deserve it. And this dad was a bossy dad. He was a dictatorial dad. He didn't have many of the graces. He'd say, do this, do that, do the other thing, do that. No, please, no, thank you, just do it. And his little kid would run around trying to please his dad, trying to do whatever he could do to make the place happy. One day, he was about 15, and his dad said, do this, son. And he said, no. What? And the dad leaps out to grab him, and that kid just drops down on the ground. He's quick, you know, men, you know, you get a bit slow. The kid raced out that door. Now, where's all my kids? All right. How old was he, did I say? 15. All right. He ran away and never sent any letters home for 5 years. How old would he be then? Come on, you kids. How old is he? 15 and 5 more? 60, is it? No. How many is it? What about if he ran away not for 5 years, ran away for 25 years? How old would he be then? Good boy. He'd be 40. Something. And you know what? When you're 40, your mum and dad are old. They're old. And he was sitting at work. And when he was sitting at work, he thought, you know, they'll be down there on the farm. I wonder what they're doing. I'd love to see Mum again. And he talked to himself, and he was just reasoning, you know, what he could do, how he could get there, how he could see them, or see her. He didn't want to see the old man. But every time it'd well up in his heart how he hated that old bloke. I would screw his neck today if I saw him. And he was so angry, drove him back. One day he took time off work and went to go that he might visit. And he got nearly to home, and he turned around and went back again, because he just couldn't bring himself to go there and see that old man. But he was thinking of Mum. And one day he wrote a letter to his mum, and as he wrote, he said, Dear Mum. And he said, the old man's going to read this. I've got to come to grips with this. We've got to deal with this. Dear Mum and Dad. And he just let out all that emotion. He just burnt all those years of anger. Poured out, Dear Mum and Dad, I want to come home. I want to come home. I'm going to come on the train. When the train comes, if you let me come home, please, put a ribbon, put a tie, put something in the mulberry tree. I want to come home. He got on the train and he travelled all day and all night and all day. And they were coming around where he knew he knew the railway line, he knew the stops, he knew the stations. As they were going around the corner, he just could not bring himself to look back at that jolly mulberry tree, because he knew they wouldn't want him. They wouldn't want him. I hate that. Oh, no, I don't. I ask for forgiveness for that. And as the train is turning the opposite direction, he looked back and he saw the mulberry tree, and there it was. Every pillowcase, every sheet, every tablecloth, hanging on, swinging on, waving on that tree. Come home, come home, come home. There are none good, no, not one. Will you listen to the angel and come home? Come home.